I figured I'd get that. You know,
I would like to call this executive meeting for this special meeting for the Resource Committee regarding the landfill. Order, please. Brother Cobb, will you give us the invitation?
please stand.
Lord, we humbly come to you and ask for your guidance in the following proceedings. Help us to do what's best for the Cherokee Nation and the Cherokee people. We ask that you watch over all the troops from the United States, around the world, and especially those that are Cherokee citizens. Amen.
Thank you, Councilman Cobb. We'll have a roll call, please.
Curtis Snell,
Here.
Chris Soap,
Here.
Buell England,
Here.
Bill John Baker,
Here.
Jack Baker,
Here.
Harley Buzzard,
Here.
Julia Coates,
Here.
Bradley Cobb,
On me.
Joe Crittenden,
Here.
Jody Fishinghawk, Meredith Fraley, Janelle Fulbright, Don Garvin, Chuck Hosking Jr.,
Here.
Hannah Glory Jordan,
Present.
David Thornton, Kara Cowan Watts, Jeff Wong.
Have a quorum. At this time, I'd like to call on Brad Carson to give an open statement, please.
For or against the prosecution, I guess I should ask. Well, it's good to see everyone again. I thought perhaps at the suggestion of the chairman I would just make a couple of initial observations. Then I know many people here have some very specific questions that I could address during that period of our discussion. And of course I look forward to answering all of them that I can. At CNB we were asked to take a look at this. A number of lawyers have been involved in this, a number of people on the business development side too. So we believe we have a comprehensive understanding of what's happening at the landfill, as well as what opportunities exist for us going forward. I thought I would structure my opening statement by just talking about a couple of things. First of all, how we got to where we are today. As a second matter, where we currently stand with ICI and the landfill operations, issues that are probably known to most people on the council, and then briefly discuss some of the possibilities going ahead, possibilities that will necessarily await further exploration and offerings to this council as well. The Cherokee Nation Sanitary Landfill was opened in 1981. We operated it under our own authority, really as a public service to the people of Adair County and the surrounding areas, lest we become, like there are regions throughout eastern Oklahoma that lack easy access to a landfill, and people just choose to dump trash on the side of the road. Or if you go up to Pitcher and Tar Creek, you see tires littering the big cave-ins there, where they make use of informal landfills in the absence of a more formal one. The landfill was marginally profitable, accepting at its height perhaps 700 or 800 tons of trash each day. In 2003-2004, a decision was imminently placed upon the council about what to do with the future of the landfill. Existing space in what is known as Cell 2 was expiring. Major capital expenditures would be needed if the landfill was going to continue in operation. When you factor in depreciation, the landfill was losing money on a net income basis, although having a positive cash flow. Indian Country Investments was formed on March 11, 2004. It is owned and managed by Gary Pitchlin, a lawyer in Norman, Oklahoma. They made a presentation to the Cherokee Nation with the ambition of providing landfill services for Northwest Arkansas, a rapidly growing metropolitan statistical area. They really has the service of only Tontitown, a rather expensive landfill for its trash needs. The major flaw in the Cherokee Nation's operation of the landfill, it appears, would be marketing. The business model for landfills is essentially their fixed cost businesses. You invest a lot to create cells and to hire people, and to take another ton of trash or another truckload of trash, well, that doesn't cost you anything at all, practically. And so the goal is to market extensively to try to get as many customers as you can consistent with the limits of the landfill. Being a governmental entity, of course, the Cherokee Nation had no real expertise in the marketing of waste management, something that ICI promised to provide for us. So after many months of negotiations, really, in July 2005, a contract was signed between the Cherokee Nation and ICI to manage the Cherokee Nation landfill. Again, Mr. Pitchland was the prime mover in that. Contemporaneous with us signing that document, more or less, the Cherokee Nation took a rather unprecedented step. And that is, they decided they would provide regulations governing the use of landfills and to put into place a rather lengthy and well-thought-out environmental code. Well, the landfill the contract with ICI required certain performance measures to be met. Of course, they were paying us a host fee. A conditional interim permit was granted by the Environmental Protection Commission group appointed by the chief and confirmed by this tribal council. That conditional interim permit was entered in July 2005. In 2006, a significant contract was entered into with the city of Fayetteville, Arkansas. A contract that, over the last 15 months or so, provides about 250 tons of trash a day. ICI, under their operation, began marketing extensively, and the volume at the landfill has modulated around 1,000, 1,100, sometimes 1,200 tons per day. 250 tons coming from the city of Fayetteville with a transfer station that was operated by ICI pursuant to that contract that was entered into with the city of Fayetteville, and a number of other customers. Between Roll-Off, a company out of northwest Arkansas that had long been delivering trash to the Cherokee Nation Sanitary Landfill, Fayetteville, and some municipalities that also had a long-term relationship with the landfill, communities like Tahlequah, Stillwell, Jay, Siloam, accounts for between 80 and 90% of the business at the landfill, even to this day. There is a long customer list after that, but they provide relatively small amounts of the total volume of trash. Well, the business model of ICI was going to require them to construct another cell. Cell 2 was rapidly running out. Cell 3 construction was begun within the last couple of years. For whatever reason, and there are lots of possible reasons for this, ICI was unable to achieve the financing necessary to open up a new cell, Cell 4. On October 8th, the useful life of Cell 3 came to an end. And today, as everyone on this council knows, there is no more trash being taken at the particular landfill. A couple of observations I think are worth noting about this. First of all, there has been extensive testing, quarterly testing done at Jenkins Creek, at some of the other tributaries to Jenkins Creek, of the leachate pond, of the stormwater impoundment pond, of groundwater and surface water. Extensive testing. And all of that testing suggests that the operation of the landfill has never resulted in any environmental spoliation. Landfills are, by their very nature, a grubby business, no doubt about that. But the surrounding area outside the landfill, according to all of the testing, has never been contaminated by improper use or operation of the landfill. A second observation is that the unprecedented move to establish the Environmental Protection Commission and that law that governs the operation of the landfill, something that was relatively unique in Indian country, if not fully unprecedented, proved to be a success. The Environmental Protection Commission was charged with safeguarding the environment and the interests of the Cherokee Nation, something that they did, something that has brought us to this point today, where because of their vigilant stewardship of the environmental concerns, their questioning of ICI has led us to the point where ICI was unable to get funding, and the landfill has ended its usable position. In August of this year, a notice of violation was sent out by the Cherokee Nation to ICI, saying that they were in breach of the contract that was signed back in 2005 between the Cherokee Nation and ICI. A notice of violation that centered on their failure to pay into the closure fund. Under the terms of that contract between ICI and the Cherokee Nation, they were required to pay $1 per ton toward a closure fee. We estimate today that they have delivered to the Cherokee Nation Sanitary Landfill roughly 600,000 tons of waste. Under that formula, they would owe $600,000 into the closure fund. They ceased paying into the closure fund in fiscal year 05, not 6 months after they had signed the contract. They paid a little less than $60,000, leading them to be in arrears to the order of $540,000 to $550,000. Of course, in September of this past year, a number of environmental violations were pointed out by the Environmental Protection Commission, which, as has been well pointed out in this body and reported in the media, fines were levied against ICI. I do think it is important to note that none of those violations resulted in environmental contamination around the region or around the area. They are potential violations, or rather they are violations, but they have, of course, the potential, if not monitored and remediated, to cause problems over the long term. But there has been no damage to the environment surrounding that. ICI is in default of their contract. That has been pointed out by the Cherokee Nation. They're in default for a number of reasons, including those pointed out by this institution. So that's where we stand today. The contract with Fayetteville was entered into between the Cherokee Nation and the City of Fayetteville, not between ICI and the City of Fayetteville. That's an important consideration and largely arose from the fact that the City of Fayetteville requires certain financial guarantees and a certain track record of performance if you're going to assume the important duty of handling their waste. It is also worth noting that that Fayetteville contract was essential to the economics of the landfill, as it remains essential if the landfill is to reopen and continue operations. That contract, therefore, because ICI did not have a track record and because they could not make adequate financial guarantees, was entered into between the Cherokee Nation and the City of Fayetteville. As I mentioned, that the Environmental Protection Commission has done its job and that there is no environmental contamination. It is also worth noting that today the Cherokee Nation continues to perform on all of its contractual obligations. No contract has been breached, and no contract will be abrogated during the course of this process. We are performing on all of the contracts. The question is, where do we go forward? There are really two major options, and within them a couple of different paths one could take. Of course, we can close it as is today. We could try to cease operations in perpetuity and close it according to the requirements of the Environmental Protection Agency, of any applicable state authorities, and of course of what law the Cherokee Nation has passed. We are not sure of the cost of that, to be certain. Every engineer you speak with will have a different estimate. Engineering, in this case, is seemingly more an art than a science. But those costs are easily into the 8 figures, tens of millions of dollars, no matter which option one chooses underneath the closure as is. If we want to continue operating it, another couple of options appear. We could operate it in the short term, perhaps constructing a new cell that would allow us to fulfill our contractual obligations and also generate profits that could be put into the closure funds to increase our ability to pay for closure when the day arises. Alternatively, we could choose to open it for the long term, a project that requires a greater capital investment, but by all accounts has, from a purely financial standpoint, abstracting away from any political or public policy concerns, from a purely financial standpoint, probably results in the greatest return to the Cherokee Nation. There's obviously much concern about the status of the landfill, and justifiably so. But I can safely assure this council that after looking into this extensively, having a number of lawyers look into this extensively, and having spent much of the last 2 weeks devoted to questions about the landfill, there is no scandal to report. There is no finger pointing to be had. The institutions that were charged with protecting the interests of the Cherokee Nation did just that. our partners are in breach of the contract. But when you're a government like we are, or a business like we are, where we are now doing, $1 billion a year or more between these various entities, we are going to have partners that default on contracts. And that's not to exonerate anyone for their culpability here. It is to say simply we have at issue here a breach of contract, one that I am confident that lawyers in the Cherokee Nation will deal with appropriately. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to answer any questions that people might have about this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Carson. What I'd like to do now is turn the meeting sort of over to Councilman Jody Fishenhoff and Joe Clinton. They have some questions, and you may be able to answer most of them or some of them. And Jody, if you and Joe would continue.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a point of
Yes.
information? Throughout the course of their questioning, if their questioning gives rise to questions among their colleagues, I assume we can have the recognition and they will yield.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You said they stopped paying in 05 into the closure fund?
Yes, that's correct.
What was done at that time when they stopped paying into the closure fund? Was it not a breach of contract in 05?
There is frankly some ambiguity on that question about how closure funds are going to be handled. I think people of the nation here, I'd be happy to have Callie or someone who's involved at that time answer that question for you. We were aware of that, and they were notified of that, and so it's something that has been we have been aware at that time. And so, Callie, if you want to answer that, and then I would just add to your question the arrearages that they have, say $500,000, $550,000. Given the closure costs that I quoted you a moment ago, the gap between those two numbers is vast. And so our decision to close or not close the landfill and those costs that are again are in the multiples of 8 figures are going to greatly exceed those numbers. But Callie, do you want to answer that question about how they notified us?
Yeah, because it's been 2 years since they first.
As Brad mentioned, the contract is somewhat ambiguous and also confusing when it comes to the closure. It refers to prior to the conditional interim permit, during conditional interim permit, and during master plan. When I came back to Cherokee Nation in March full-time as the treasurer, I started reviewing the landfill contract and found, in fact, that we had not billed ICI for the 2006 $1 per ton closure costs. I immediately billed them and entered into discussions with ICI regarding payment of that. It was their interpretation of the contract that I was not reading it properly, so we went back and forth probably for a couple of months. And after getting legal review, that's when we initiated the default letter.
Mr. Chairman, would Ms. Fishinghawk yield for just a follow-up question? Mr. Carson, who was responsible for Ms. Ketcher for monitoring whether or not ICI paid into the closure fund? I understand that there may be some arguable ambiguity, but somebody on ICI is certainly mindful that there was an ambiguity, and they seem to have taken advantage of that. Who on our end should have been mindful of that ambiguity and should have monitored that and should have reached out and made sure that money was paid?
Councilman, perhaps that's Callie who kind of was looking at that, since it was an internal governmental responsibility.
To be frank, there was some turnover in the accounting department, and I honestly think we weren't watching it as closely as we should have been during those months. Like I said, when I came back full-time in March of 2007, I jumped on it and we got it caught up, and at least on the billing side. So I will take responsibility for it not being watched as closely as it should have been.
And I would, if I could add just to that, Councilman, the ambiguity that Callie referred to is worth noting here. If you look at the contract, there is discussion that every single year there's going to be an evaluation by an engineer of how much money should be in the so-called closure fund, a fund that's contemplated by the contract that ICI would pay into. That was being done. ICI's position was that there was adequate funds in that closure account, and that defined the scope of their obligation. It has been our position, and when you read back into the contract, it is actually quite clear, but is back in a toward the very end of the contract in a different section, that they have an obligation to pay $1 a year $1 per ton into the closure fund. So that's been the dispute about it. And when the engineers made that estimate of how much money should be in the closure funds, it was roughly correct, plus or minus a little bit. And so that was kind of the issue, is the engineer said you should have X in the closure fund, X was there. And so I think that, I would suggest or speculate, that led people to be comfortable with how the arrangement was, given that there was, one had to read deeply into the contract to appreciate the nature of that obligation.
And then, Mr. Chairman, just one follow-up, and I'd like to yield back to Mr. Schumacher. With respect to the 600,000 ton figure that you mentioned earlier, is that 600,000 tons pursuant to the contract between Cherokee Nation and Fayetteville, so that's where that is coming from? Is that overall?
That's overall. That's about a quarter to a fifth of the total tonnage was coming from Fayetteville.
And could we estimate how much ICI is receiving, or how much they're charging per ton to the customers?
We do know that, at least for the major customers. We have the contracts between ICI and Roll-Off, which is about 70-75%. We know what the contract amount is with Fayetteville. And so, and we know how much the municipalities are paying. So, and we know how much the tipping fee is. Tipping fee being the term of art in landfills, as its name suggests, how much you pay to tip your truck at the fill. So we can do a back-of-the-envelope kind of calculation, Councilman.
And ICI, their position with respect to not paying into the closure fund is based on their contractual interpretation, not some plea of poverty that they could not meet their obligation. Is that correct?
They don't make any plea of poverty. I spoke yesterday with a representative of ICI who said, we acknowledge we should have paid, but to be frank, we didn't read back to section 902 in the document, which is back with a lot of other kind of pro forma details, where it makes it clear. In the earlier part of the contract, it's a little less unequivocal about that obligation. And so they have acknowledged they should have paid into that closure fee in a meeting yesterday, a private meeting I had with them.
And do you take from that they're prepared to pay, or is there some remaining dispute?
I take it from that we expect them to pay, and that's really the status of the relationship today, that we expect them to pay into that closure fund and fulfill their contractual obligations to do that. We are in discussions with them about how they're going to satisfy those kind of obligations.
Yield back to Mr. Fishing, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Henry, you got a statement?
A question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carson, in response to a question that was earlier submitted, it was informed that a certain performance collateral was
a bond,
or bond or deposit, I believe as it was called, was an amendment to the contract signed by Doug Bain on behalf of Cherokee Nation, and I'll ask that question later, but gave the Cherokee Nation three options: a $2 million surety bond, a $500,000 letter of credit, or execute an assignment of all of the assets of Feather Hauling Services to include both equipment and personnel to the city of Fayetteville, together with a deposit of $100,000. My question is, who deposited that $100,000, and what is the status of that $100,000 right now?
That was the option that we chose, that last option, where $100,000 was deposited with the right of Fayetteville to come against the assets of Feather Hauling, which is a company also managed and owned by Gary Pitchlin, and is responsible for the trucking from the transfer station in Fayetteville over here. ICI, upon my investigation of this, deposited that money. It's ICI's $100,000. They gave that money to the Cherokee Nation, and there are two $50,000 checks, one signed jointly by ICI and the Cherokee Nation, and one purely from the Cherokee Nation, cashier's checks to the city of Fayetteville. that money is still resting at Fayetteville as a performance bond for the contract.
Mr. Chairman, a
Yes.
follow-up. And I guess the first part of my question, this contract with the city of Fayetteville was executed by the Cherokee Nation with Doug Bain's signature on it. By what authority did Doug Bain have to operate the Cherokee Nation?
No, I don't know that I can answer that question for you, Todd. You're into kind of a legal question about principal and agent. I guess I would just make the observation that as good business, we need to live up to the terms of the Fayetteville contract. And so, the questions of authority within the Cherokee Nation and such as this, I can't answer them. What representations were made, what the expectations of Fayetteville were, these are all things, as you know, are important principal agent law. They're not things I can tell you. I just know as a general observation that we should act as if, that's a contract we need to abide by.
Mr. Henry?
One more follow-up, and then I'll give it to somebody else. Earlier in your comments, Mr. Carson, you had stated that we are living up to our contracts, as in plural. Is there any other contracts that we are performing, in particular the city of Siloam, are we performing vis-a-vis ICI's obligations?
No, not that I'm aware of. We are performing on the Fayetteville contract. The other relationships with the municipalities were informal agreements, historical agreements on those. And what we have done with them is not perform on those agreements, but work with them and tell them kind of the status, educate them about what our plans are when we know plans, and encourage them to find short-term alternatives as we debate what the future is going to be for us.
I'll give the floor.
Councilman Baker?
If the contract with Fayetteville was with the Cherokee Nation,
Yes,
and they were paying $24 a ton
and change, yes.
and change, and we were supposed to get $2 tipping and $1, did we just take those checks and just give them to Pixel, and then they just didn't give us back the money?
Take the $24 checks,
Yeah.
you mean, on that? Well, Callie, I'll let, you were there to transact the checks and such, so.
I mean, we didn't deposit them and keep our share?
We did deposit those checks. In fact, those checks from Fayetteville covered the operating expenses that ICI was responsible for reimbursing us for, which was the salaries and wages, and a small amount of the host fee. So we kept the entire check from Fayetteville, and then we would reconcile that against what they owed us. However, that was not sufficient to cover, that was 250 tons a day. That was not sufficient to cover the entire closure liability plus the $2 host fee. But we did keep those checks, and we deposited them and applied them against what ICI owed us.
Because we were paying all their employees and all their...
Well, they're our employees.
We were paying the employees.
Yeah.
And then there were two notes, the bulldozer and the loan to C&E. Those are the items that ICI agreed per the contract to reimburse us for.
And in this grand scheme, where's the $2.something million that they were obligated to pay us to induce us to go in this contract with them to start with? That's front money.
That wasn't upfront money, if I would just respectfully...
It was, we can go to the tapes, and this body, it was upfront money. That's the way it was presented to us. It wasn't until later that they said, well, as soon as we get a master plan. When it came to this body, we can go to the tapes, and we were told that they're going to give us $2.something or million up front, and that was the inducement to even do the deal.
I can't...
You weren't here, and I understand.
I know, I can't opine on it for you. The way the contract reads, they paid us $300,000 up front, with the remaining $2.7 million coming upon approval of the master plan. And so, I respectfully have to demur to your question. I don't know the answer to that.
So, are we getting it or not?
$2.7 million?
Yeah. Well, I thought they gave us 300 more, so it's...
So they gave us $300,000, but the EPC, in the course of their oversight, has not approved a master plan, and so the obligation has not been required of ICI.
Councilman Glory.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand. Has ICI paid us any actual money, or are we getting a credit? We're giving them a credit for the money they owe us from the Fayetteville checks? Are we getting any real dollars from ICI?
Yes, I believe we are. We have the $300,000 up front. They pay their $55,000 approximately into the closure fund. And then the host fee, which is required by the contract, has been about $1.1 million to us. Now, your question about whether this is a credit or not, I'll let Callie answer how the actual bookkeeping on that takes place.
They have actually been paying us. The only item that has been in dispute was the closure costs. They have been paying the host fee. If the prior to the Fayetteville contract, they reimbursed us for those expenses. They paid their host fee. When Brad mentioned that they had paid closure for 2005, that was actually paid in February, March of '06 when the calculations were final, and that was for the 3 months that they were operating the landfill for fiscal year '05.
Okay, so you said, Brad, you could do kind of a back of the envelope estimate based on the contracts you have copies of what ICI has received on all of the agreements that we know about from the landfill. Do you have an idea how many dollars that is?
Well, I was...
Don't go away, Kelly.
I don't have that number for you. I mean, we can do the quick math on that. Assume that on like a, net of transportation costs from Fayetteville, that they're making, $12, $13 before you subtract out operating costs and all of that. $12 or $13 paid in terms of gross revenue. And they're doing 1,000 tons times 200 days a year. So that's the kind of rough gross revenue numbers you're talking about. I would just note, as kind of an observation on that the business model of landfills, because I know there has been some discussion that I've seen in the press about whether we got taken to the cleaners, if you will. The business model of landfills is not to make money up front. The business model for landfills is to make money in years 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 out, after you've paid off these massive capital expenditures that are required to develop it. And so I've kind of, you can back into it. I have no doubt that ICI made some money off of the transaction, so that's not hard to figure that out. But I do think that a close reading of the document suggests that we weren't taken advantage of in terms of what the contract required, or short of the closure fees and their failure to do some of the environmental liabilities on a financial basis, we weren't taken to the cleaners on this. I don't know, Callie, if you want to.
Okay, so let's just say roughly the figure on 600 tons at what you just said is about $14 million.
Okay.
Now,
600 tons,
we don't
6,000.
ever, we're doing it longhand here. What about how much have we received? Callie, you probably know this.
It's about $1.1 million.
The host fees are about $1.1 million. The monthly operating expenses that they are reimbursing us for are probably 100 to 120. It fluctuates.
So they've gotten 14 million, we've got $1 million something. They owe us $500,000 in the one account, and they owe us some more in the tipping fee.
I don't believe they owe us any more of the tipping fees.
Okay, so they owe us $500,000.
Right.
What collection measures are we taking to collect this money from this relatively new LLC? And have we checked to see if this LLC has any assets or has acquired any assets during their 2 or 3 years of, 3 years of existence?
I have been working with the Attorney General's office since Brad and C&D has taken on this project. They've done a lot of research as well. So yes, steps are being taken to collect and to make sure that we get the money that we are owed.
Well, as fast as money goes into an LLC, it goes out the other way. we probably need to be quite speedy.
And that's something that people will have to discuss, whether, that's a litigation question that is beyond the scope of what we looked at, but...
Just one other question, and I know I have limited principal agency law background. I'm assuming from what you're saying, you probably do too. But as I recall from 26 years ago when I went to law school, and I think it's still the rule, agents can't serve two masters normally. Does this not look like we've got a problem here with our agents serving both Cherokee Nation and ICI?
Well, they were at all times employees of the Cherokee Nation. So the landfill employees, there's a dozen of them there, are all employees of the Cherokee Nation. And they were reimbursing us. That's part of the reimbursement scheme that Callie mentioned there. And so I have no reason to think that their loyalties were divided, Council.
You don't think that the fact that they know ultimately where their pay is coming from, they're driving ICI vehicles, they're receiving other perks from ICI, doesn't make a difference in some of their decision-making processes?
I would say the evidence against that, respectfully, is that ICI has stopped performing on the contract, but all of those employees are still Cherokee Nation employees today. We are, in the end, the safe harbor for the employees there. And so, I would respectfully suggest that, and this from my knowledge of the individuals involved, that their loyalties are to the Cherokee Nation.
Mr. Hammer, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a three-part question. Based on earlier comments that you made, that it was important to honor this contract with the city of Fayetteville. So I take it is the intention of CMD to honor that contract with Fayetteville, correct?
Well, we're not a signatory to the contract, and so
the Cherokee Nation.
Our authority is simply that to urge, as a business matter, honoring contracts is certainly best practice.
And how much money is that going to cost us to honor that contract, and what budget is it proposed that money comes from?
Well, I can't give you a definitive answer because it largely depends on what the next steps that we choose to do are, how long the current situation maintains it. On a daily basis right now,
Okay, on a daily basis right now.
we are roughly losing $650
A day.
a day on that contract, 20 days a month. So, that's $12,000 a month or a little more than that. So
That's based on $1,200 tons a day.
it's based on the Fayetteville contract, which is the one that we're having to perform on because of the contract. We have an arrangement where that trash is now being taken to the Tawnytown landfill, which I mentioned is our chief competitor for Northwest Arkansas, and being hauled there directly by the city of Fayetteville. So the economics of that are lead to, by rough calculation, of about $650 a day. You have two other parts to your question?
No, that was going to honor it, how much it's going to cost, and what budget is it. I guess the last part is what budget is that to be coming out of?
Again, I can't answer that. Those of you who know the Cherokee Nation's budget better than I do are best, equipped to answer that.
The lady
Yes,
coming up to
Ms.
the-
Ketchum perhaps can opine on that.
The landfill, as you're aware from the budget hearings, does have an expense budget. That is what will be absorbing this for the moment. And at the Executive Finance Committee next week, I will be bringing revised revenue projection, as I am required to do when we have a major change in our revenue stream, such as what has happened at the landfill.
And I want to make sure I am clear to the council and to you, Todd, about that. There is, of course, the payroll of the 12 individuals at the landfill who will be continued to be paid, of course, although there's no corresponding revenue associated with the landfill. It is our understanding that most of those people can continue work there, doing a lot of the necessary earth moving and such as that. But that payroll is not included in my $650 a day number that I gave.
Pure contract.
That's the pure Fayetteville contract. Exactly.
Mr. Hoskins.
Yeah, Mr. Carson, I know this predates you, but I was alarmed at what Councilman Bill John Baker mentioned a moment ago about the upfront money. He understood there was representations at meetings that predated me that this was upfront money. And I know this predates you, but you've seen nothing in any contract that indicates that was upfront money. Is that what I...
No, that is correct.
And maybe Ms. Ketcher can shed light on this. Does the administration, just from what you just heard, dispute that the council was told it was upfront money?
I have not gone back and looked at those council tapes, so I can't say yes or no what was presented. I know the concept that was presented was it was a $3 million contract, $300,000 up front, and $2.7 million when the master plan was completed. I would have to go back to the tapes as Mr. Baker did to see what discussion transpired during that committee.
And then I guess I would ask the both of you. Mr. Carson's laid out, I think, two options. The second option having some sub-options. The first option to close. The second option is continue operating, either A, in the short term, B, in the long term. Does the administration have a position on what the best course of action is? And separately, I know C&B is looking at it from a business standpoint. And I think you mentioned the long-term operation was the best from a business standpoint, the most profitable in the long term. But what about the administration?
The administration has not reviewed all those options. C&B is still gathering that information to bring to the administration so that we can have all that information to make an informed decision. And at that time, I would assume that we would come back to this council and lay out what the options were and what the recommendation would be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Creighton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carson, I've got, since this is in my district, I've got about three things that concern me. Environmental, number one, because it affects the people in my district, could affect them. They live around the landfill, and there's a lot of concerns over there for what potential hazards or the hazards they've already been exposed to. Next, I would say revenue and jobs. Now, the $2.7 million that I feel like they still owe us, and part of that master plan performance was their being able to submit it to our EPC folks. So it's a two-pronged deal there. The other part, the $540,000 on the closure fund, I mean, that's already passed. I mean, they owe us for it, okay? But the bleeding continues every day with this deal in Fayetteville. $600. I thought it was more like $1,200 to $1,500. I'm not sure, but I don't see that Fayetteville operation as our contract. I'm sorry, I disagree with whoever said it was our obligation. I don't think it was signed by our tribe. I think Feather Hauling was actually doing the processing of the trash to wherever, down to our landfill, now I guess to Town or someplace else. Supposedly that's Mr. Pitchland's little operation. I don't like to damage relationships, contracts, and all of that. But if the folks in Northwest Arkansas get their feelings hurt, then that's kind of too bad. I don't see it as our obligation to continue this, and I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Baker.
Yeah, Brad, I kind of agree with Joe from the standpoint of I really think they owe us the 2.7. But what are we on the hook for right now? We built a $4 million sale that you're now telling me is completely filled up and gone. And, we obviously believe we were going to collect at least $4 million when we built the sale. And we obviously haven't. That was a brand new sale that was supposed to last 10 years or better. And, or at least it was when we invested the money in it. And as I recall, if we collected the 2.7, we were just going to be at break even then if they went ahead and paid for the brand new dozer, the $500,000 dozer that we bought. And if I'm not mistaken, C&E had to loan some money to the tribe on the sale, and I'm assuming that's still owed. I mean, what are we on the hook for? Right now, whether we decide to invest in the landfill, I'm assuming you're going to come back and tell me another $4 million. What's left on the table? And, I mean,
Well, let me try.
I'm not saying we got skinned, but just how bad skinned did we get?
They breached the contract. They breached the contract, Councilman. I don't believe that we were duped. Let me explain what I mean by that. And perhaps just breaking down kind of the economics of this and how much we're out, because I'll try to kind of get to your question. I don't know what representations were made to the council last. The contract clearly, unequivocally, and unambiguously states that the $2.7 million payment comes upon approval of the master plan. One can argue whether they behaved in good faith in trying to put that plan together. They can argue about how difficult it was to get approval of the master plan. It was certainly, I would suggest, knowing a bit about the economics of landfills, in their interest to have the master plan approved. Because the money for landfills, again, is in years 10, 20, 30, 40. And approval of the master plan was seemingly necessary for their financing activities. So the idea that it wasn't in their interest to get the master plan, well, I can only speculate on their motives, but it certainly wouldn't have made good business sense to pretend as if the master plan didn't exist. And the contract clearly makes that payment of $2.7 million conditional upon approval of the master plan, notwithstanding whatever representations were made to the council. In terms of what much money we're out, well, I think the economics of the contract can be looked at such as this. When ICI came on board to run that contract, the space in cell 3 was running out. There was a question of what we would do: invest more, close it down ourselves. The space that they filled up was roughly about a plus or minus $100,000, $1.5 million cell. $1.6 million cell, I think, was the latest number I saw on that. That's what they had filled up that expired on October 8th. They have a note payable under the contract terms to Cherokee Nation Enterprises of $1.3 million. So, assuming, as I do, that they will pay that note to us, there will be no outlays from us, in the sense that we won't be out any money, I think, to use the term as I calculate it.
You count the dozer?
Not counting the dozer, right. But they are liable for the note on the dozer.
Which is how much?
Callie, do you want to? Dina, do you know how much the note on the dozer is? I should introduce Dina God, who is a lawyer on our staff. Why don't you look that up very quickly, and we'll inform the council here momentarily.
And I agree that the business plan that a landfill is, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, unless you can get a free sale that you don't, you can take $10 million and run it.
But there's no indication.
And that's where the most profit is.
They had no indication they had a pre-sale, and I would, again, speculating that the pre-sale was going to be conditional on proper permitting. No one invests in a landfill without permits. That's the value of a landfill, after all. And so, proper permitting was a part of their business plan. I've seen no evidence, and I don't see any business reason why they would enter into an agreement with the intention of not getting the proper permitting. It doesn't make sense from their own narrow financial interests. So I don't know if I fully answered your question on that, but how much money we're out. So we have a note outstanding. I would say that is the significant exposure, a note that they're contractually liable to pay.
And the dozer is pretty well shot now. Is that accurate?
I don't know, Councilman, what the status of the dozer is.
I
don't know.
personally looked at it, but that's kind of...
I don't know. But I will get you the answer here momentarily about the status of the dozer.
Ms. Laura, you have the floor.
Well, first, I just want to tell Brad, I know you were the last one to be left with this. Your hand was the last hand on it, and this is why you're up here today, having to answer a lot of tough questions, which is really not fair to you, because I think we've been somewhat harsh on you, and this is not of your making. And I too, as Councilman Crittenden had pointed out, is we don't want to see a negative effect on the environment. We want to see jobs protected for our rank and file people that are at the landfill. Now, I'm not so certain about the people at the top. I'm going to be real honest with you about that. But our rank and file folks, yes, they need to be taken care of. This is not their doing either. But from a lawyer's standpoint, the bottom line that I see is we've got a contract with ICI. ICI has violated this contract. And I want to see collection measures started immediately, and I would assume that needs to be done by our Attorney General's office, and I see Ms. Hammond's here today. I want to know what's going to be done to collect on this contract. And I guess that's a question for, more properly, probably for Ms. Hammonds to take that.
Am I going to make a suggestion on that? Speaking with Todd earlier, we can do executive session to discuss issues like that, perhaps, and that might be the appropriate place to address some of those kinds of questions.
And I would defer if her comments are going to be of an executive session type, that we possibly need to look into an executive session.
Okay, well, let me tell you, and we've mentioned it publicly, if I can.
Please. No.
We have declared default. We sent a formal notice of default letter on 2 items of default. They responded and corrected one. It had to do with insurance, and the other is on the closure account, the amount of closure account. They dispute the methodology by which that's calculated. We have, obviously, at this point, other items of default that can be alleged. We are doing everything we can, and this is probably where, if we want to talk in more detail, we should go into executive session. We're doing everything we can to protect all of our claims against them, to protect the claims against us, and also consider what's best from a business point of view and from an environmental point of view. It really is a tripartite sort of issue. But you're absolutely correct. And the legal one, that's my bailiwick, and we're doing everything we can to protect our interest. And as to the City of Fayetteville issue, of course, we'll do everything to protect our interests there, too. But that's, again, a business decision that's been made.
And that brings up, and we may want to consider an executive session, but I have one other little, I think probably this is better answered too by if we could get Callie to come back to visit with us again.
How much on the dozer? What she's...
They owe $209,000 on the dozer, and the note payable to C&E is $1.14 million. So you have a combined $1.35 million between those two notes.
Okay, and my last question poses to Callie. You said that we're now covering our loss with Fayetteville out of the landfill account. Yes. Can you recall what is left in our landfill budget, and at what point do you think we're probably looking at this body having to consider a mod to put more money into this situation?
Okay. At the Executive Finance meeting next week, I want to bring you an updated budget for the landfill. Where we are right now is the revenues, we know our cost to generate those revenues exceeds them by $650 a day. So that's how we're operating at the loss. And then we have the fixed costs of the employees. I will bring an updated financial statement. Probably I should have that for E&F next week. And a lot of this is contingent on which direction we go. If I bring to this body a 90-day operating budget that says we want to keep the employees, we want to keep performing, that's more than likely what I will be asking you to look at next week. Because within 30, 60 days, we should know which direction we're going to go, whether we're going to attempt to reopen the landfill by developing a new cell, or whether we're going to ask to close it down. Is that a fair statement?
Very fair.
Just one, so that brought on another question. Then what you're saying is, you're bringing a modification to us at the next budget meeting.
I think I have to. I'm required by law to come before this body, the Exec and Finance Committee, when we have a significant change in revenues. And we obviously have a significant change in revenues right now.
Now back to whether you want to go into executive session.
Councilman Soap, you have the floor.
Yeah, I've got basically three quick questions, Mr. Carson. It says, when does the contract with Fayetteville end?
It's a 5-year contract with a right of 4-year extension. Is that correct? Option to renew. And so that contract was signed in the summer of '06.
Okay. And then the follow-up is, you mentioned that there's other people that were depending on the existence of this landfill and its operation. Have you received any feedback on what they're currently doing and the financial impact of their existing contracts and where that refuse and waste is likely to end up?
We've encouraged them to make short-term arrangements as we debate our future. Because if, as an example, we choose to reopen the landfill, again, volume is key in the business. So we can't afford, from our standpoint, if we reopen, to permanently send those to other parties.
Right.
So towns like Stillwell, Mike Doublehead, who runs that operation, we've encouraged them to make short-term arrangements. For them, that means Sallisaw, which has a landfill, although it's seemingly not taking much, if any, new material. Town, Muskogee has a facility run by Waste Management. Sand Springs has a facility also. And so they're making alternative arrangements. If it's a long-term situation, then they're going to, move presumably to Town or someone like that. But I've told them to stay short-term.
And then the final question is in your meeting with them, what intent did they have as far as, was it a surprise that the capacity just disappeared on October the 6th? Or, obviously you have to have some type of monitoring going on that said, hey, Project B needs to be before Project A fills up. With that data known, what intensity or whatnot was occurring during this time for them to get this master plan from the EPC? Can you provide feedback?
I can't tell you the intensity of their efforts. I can tell you what their efforts were, which is they had submitted a number of plans that were deemed partial or defective by the EPC over the course of the previous month to extend it for 20 years and then for 10 years and then for a year and a half kind of fix. And according to them, they were seeking to obtain financing up until the last moment to reopen a cell. So that is their version of events. There is no doubt that they were trying to seek various permitting. The intensity of that effort, I don't know. I can't offer an opinion about that.
Councilman Fishenhall, you have the floor.
Okay, I have a question. You said that the people out at the landfill were ICI employees. I spoke with the chief last Friday, as did Chairman Curtis, in a meeting at noon, and I was told by him, chief himself, that Doug Baines is not a Cherokee Nation employee. He is an ICI employee. I asked him it once more again, and he told me the same answer again. So, with that said, from the chief, somebody, not the nation, signed a contract with Fayetteville. Somebody, not the nation, has been hauling the trash, which should be feather hauling, and somebody, not the nation, has been collecting money. So I'm trying to ask you to convince me how we have lived up to this contract when we didn't sign it, we didn't perform it, we didn't haul it.
Well, most importantly, we own the landfill, Councilwoman, and I would say that's the dispositive issue here. We did sign the contract with an employee, Doug Bain, and Doug is here. I'll let him offer his view, but I don't know what, perhaps the chief misspoke, or I don't know. But by all accounts, Doug Bain is an employee of the Cherokee Nation. And so I don't know, Callie, do you want to confirm, or Doug, do you want to offer, you can talk about who your employer is.
I've got an email that comes from, it's not like, we all got Cherokee.org addresses. His comes to me from an ICI address. So I'm back to wearing the two hats in the agent.
Well, I would somewhat liken it to our arrangement with the Heritage Center, where the employees are on Cherokee Nation's payroll. They enjoy the same benefits as Cherokee Nation employees, but for the most part, their day-to-day supervision comes from the Heritage Center. This arrangement with the employees who were at the landfill was done to ensure that Cherokee Nation employees continue to get the same benefits and pay that they got when they were employed by Cherokee Nation. So that's why the arrangement was set up that way. ICI would reimburse for the expenses of their salaries and their benefits, and they would remain on Cherokee Nation payroll. I think it comes to a question of who's providing daily supervision. And per the operating agreement, ICI basically had responsibility for day-to-day operations. So it's one of those where you could have a legal interpretation be different from a day-to-day operational interpretation.
Okay, do you have the questions in front of you? Because I'm referring to question 2.
I don't have those.
Okay, I'll read it to you. Doug Baines signed the original contract with the City of Fayetteville. To our knowledge, Mr. Baines did not have the authority to sign the contract on behalf of the Cherokee Nation. The principal chief has the authority to sign it and could delegate that authority, but we could locate no evidence he did so.
I can answer that. I guess there's two separate questions. One, is he an employee of the Cherokee Nation? And two, even if an employee of the Cherokee Nation, does he have authority to sign the contract? From my representations and everyone I've spoken to, all of the employees at the landfill were employees of the Cherokee Nation. And again, that was a benefit to the employees. The benefits and pay to those employees, by many accounts, far exceeds that the typical landfill employees receive. So this was done as a favor to them. The second question is, if an employee of the Cherokee Nation, did he have the authority to sign the contract? I would suggest, I'll give you kind of an off-the-cuff legal opinion at my own risk.
And here she comes.
The liability insurer is sending their agent up here. I think the question is, everything else being equal, did he have authority to do it? Is the answer suggested? There's no evidence that he did.
Well, are the other employees out there signing contracts for Cherokee Nation and pledging us to anything?
I don't believe that there's
Or am
any
I
other
allowed to sign a
contracts.
contract and pledge us to do something?
I guess the question is this: if you hold yourself out and people come to have expectations of someone that they do have that authority, the law typically grants them that even though we didn't give them the authority, the other party has the right to rely on representation. And so I think the question is going to come down to a legal one, that those who do this more full-time than I do is, not whether he had the authority from us, but did Fayetteville think that he had the authority to represent us? That is the fundamental legal question. And I would suggest the answer to that is yes.
Mr. Henry.
Excuse me. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. The questions by Councilman Fishenhock are well placed and are very beneficial. However, we are getting into that realm that we are possibly committing ourselves one way or another to a legal position that in a public body may not be appropriate for us to do so. I would prefer that any of this type of discussion be left privately so that we keep all of our legal options open.
Can we go into executive session and discuss what we just discussed plus what she said earlier? What won't come out?
No. There are very limited ways that a tribal council meeting can go into executive session. And that's set up by a constitution. This isn't one of them. These types of questions although as counselors you're entitled to ask, I would recommend that you ask those privately to Mr. Carson, who is an attorney, and our Attorney General, or also any number of the attorneys that are present.
Okay, we'll get off.
And I would offer a caveat to that earlier view that, again, I'm not an expert in principal agent law. That's just a very casual, untutored observation.
Okay. My other question was, we're talking about the city of Fayetteville. You told us how much tonnage roughly there. Give us an approximate amount of tonnage we received from Fayetteville during this time. And I took it and multiplied it by the amount we get on contract. And from Fayetteville alone, I'm looking at 14.7.
I'm sorry, 14.7
14.7 is what city of
Tons?
Fayetteville, yeah, no, million,
million.
is what the city of Fayetteville, is what ICIN made off the city of Fayetteville alone. And according to question 21, we know of 4 other contracts they have out there with other cities. Can you, at some point in time, look at them and tell me how this company that made close to $15 million in less than 2 years off one contract alone has no assets?
Well, I'll tell you a couple things about that. One is, you're looking at gross revenue numbers. They're paying operating expenses, they're reimbursing the 12 employees, the transfer station, they're paying trucking costs from Fayetteville over to the landfill, and these kinds of things. And so that's all coming out of that number you offer us. So, again, we can back into that. But I have no doubt they made a profit. In terms of what happened to that profit, it's an LLC. I have no doubt they dividended out to the people who have a financial stake in it. And so some of that money may have been reinvested in things like Feather Hall, but, we don't have a full list or accounting of their assets, and there's no obvious way for us to get that, Councilwoman.
And are we looking at getting it, or there's just no way?
I mean, we can search public records to the extent they bought assets, that liens are filed against them and things, but, it's looking through a glass darkly until that time.
Well, I keep hearing how much marketing experience they have in landfills, and they keep saying they have a lot of marketing experience. But so far, when we say they, we really don't mean it plural, do we? We just really mean Gary so far. Gary Pitchland, because that's the only one that we know is part of ICI.
It is rumored that there are other people who have financial interests. These aren't fools. They know how to structure complicated legal entities. And I have no doubt that there are people besides Gary Pitchland with a financial interest in ICI.
Okay, my last question is, help me, maybe Bill John, you can help me. Does the landfill not owe the general fund a little over $1 million?
1.35, Kelly?
How much?
Kelly has stepped outside again, knowing that
Approximately 1.5 to Gen Fund.
1.5 to Gen Fund. So that, on top of the 1.3, is another 1.5. We sure need that 2.7.
Well, I don't believe the 1.5, with all respect, Councilman, is from the ICI period of operations. I don't know. I don't believe so. My casual understanding of that transaction, that is back during the era when the nation itself...
Well, no, the 1.5 is what we paid out of Gen Fund for the sale that is now completely full. So, I mean, it's still a
True. I mean, I guess the observation I would make is the EPC was tasked with the right to approve the master plan and the obligation to protect the interests of the Cherokee Nation and its environment. And they did just that. So what we're asking, one can quibble with their decision-making authority, but they are someone who,
They had no earthly idea that their master plan was hinging on a $2.7 million payment to the tribe until about 60 days ago. And when I told them that was the hitch, they looked like deer in headlights, and I think we got a resignation over it and some other stuff, because I don't think they want to be the fall guys on this deal. That they were trying to do the environmental piece and had no earthly idea that the contract was hinging on them doing a master plan or getting it done.
Perhaps. Again, I didn't know. I guess I would respectfully suggest, and I do this with the greatest respect, Councilman Baker, that the interests of the EPC are not to look at what contractual amounts are hinging upon their requirements. If that is something we ask of them to do, we can make that expressly part of their mandate. Rather, they are to see whether the documentation submitted to them complies with the environmental rules and is safe. And that is, by all accounts, what they did. That was their mandate. And they seemingly did themselves well. They are not fall guys. We uniquely created an agency to monitor our environment, to prove to the state and federal authorities that we were capable of doing that. And the EPC acquitted themselves well in that process.
Joe, Councilman Credit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carson, I talked with the gentleman from Stillwell a little bit ago, and you mentioned his name earlier, Mr. Douglas. They're in the process of helping us with some hauling some leachate, I believe, from the dump site, as we speak probably, to run, to treat whatever through their facility over there.
Right.
I guess I have a question as to who's going to pick the tab up on that, since ICI is, I'm not sure where they're at. And is it going to be a problem like that, as it has been in the past, when it breaches, possibly, because of heavy rains in the fall and so on? And are we going to be taxed with, taking care of those expenses however long, as a tribe?
Two questions, I think, if I could divide them up. We are picking up the tab for that hauling of the leachate to Stillwell. There was an immediate capital infusion to deal with some issues like that, the hauling leachate, some modest equipment repairs that needed to be done. And so we are definitely picking up the tab. As what happens to the leachate pond over time is really a decision about what we choose to do in terms of closure. That irrespective of probably whether we close or continue, there's going to have to be action taken. My understanding from landfill experts is that the leachate treatment pond is not state-of-the-art. The storage tanks are more typically used. There's a problem with this landfill in that it collects lots of stormwater because of the grade at the location. And that's definitely not the preferred way, at least in state-of-the-art landfills, to deal with leachate. And so I think it's going to be a long-term plan, no matter which direction we go. But in the short term, that hauling to Stillwell is a cost that we're bearing, yes.
Thank you.
Councilman Thornton.
Well, there's been a lot of questions answered here, and some that I wanted to ask, but I'd like to know if we entered into a contract with ICI to run the trash dump over there.
To run the
To run this trash dump.
the dump.
Landfill, or what you want to call it, in 2005. And then we turn around and sign the contract with Fayetteville. Shouldn't ICI have some kind of obligation in paying that $650 a day?
They certainly should have a moral obligation. I think the immediate question is, do they have a contractual obligation? And as a signatory to the contract, Cherokee Nation has that obligation. ICI did not sign the contract with them. And so in the couple of weeks we've been looking at the issue, we're not aware. My casual research has not revealed a legal theory at the moment to get ICI on the hook for that.
Well, if they're paying employees and they're paying the trucking cost and all this type of thing, looks like they'd have an obligation there. But anyway, there's something else I'd like to ask you for some information. And I'd like to have copies, and I guess the rest of the council would too, I don't know, copies of the testing that was done to the water and the environmental around that area. And I'd like to get those copies, and I don't know how soon we can get them, or whether they can be given out.
I see no reason why those can't be provided. Councilman.
You know, you hear all kinds of rumors about what's in the water and what isn't in the water, what's in the air and what isn't in it. But if we can go to those testings, we can primarily solve that problem.
I agree.
Stop the rumors.
The data's there or it isn't there.
Right.
And so the data, as it's been reviewed, suggests there is no problem. I would think it would be appropriate for the council to take a look at that data themselves.
Thank you.
Councilman Hoskins.
Yeah, this question is probably best for Attorney General and the Treasurer, but I just want some assurances that the administration now has some controls in place to ensure that when people are executing contracts in the name of the Cherokee Nation, that we are documenting that we've got controls in place. And I assume we did before. My hope is that this is a bit of an anomaly, but if it's not, I hope we've corrected it.
I can't speak on behalf of the administration, but let me speak on behalf of, since it's my constitutional duty to defend the nation and to represent us in any court. Legally, I don't believe that we have a valid contract with the city of Fayetteville. Now, we have chosen for various reasons to continue to perform, and that may very well be a good decision for other reasons. But legally, there are a number of defenses, and I'll be happy to sit down with any of you individually and talk about those as to that document, which I don't think is binding in a court of law.
Is one of those defenses that the person who contracted did not have the authority? Is that one?
Mr. Hoskin, I really don't want to talk about our defenses.
Let me withdraw that.
Okay.
You raised the defenses. I'm not asking you about the defenses. I'm asking you, what we've seen on this committee is at least evidence that by the admission of whoever answered Ms. Fishinghock's questions is an admission that someone executed a contract who either lacked the authority to do so, the express authority, or had the authority, but the administration somehow has no evidence that authority ever existed. So my question has nothing to do with your defenses as to this contract. My question is, going forward, can we have some assurances that there are controls in place, that we don't get in this situation where you and I have to have this discussion about defenses to a contract, that we can avoid that altogether? That's, with all due respect, that's my question.
Sorry, I misinterpreted it, and someone from administration will have to answer that. It's my job to defend us and assert our legal causes of action. So
and does Ms. Cager can you weigh in on this at all?
I can tell you that we do have policies and procedures in administration regarding signature authority levels, who is authorized to enter into a contract, and I think this is a unique situation where maybe there was apparent authority but not actual authority, and this is something that's going to probably work its way through the legal system.
But we do apart from having to potentially defend a lawsuit, that aside,
right,
is it your view that this is a bit of an anomaly, that we would have someone signing a contract and yet have no paper trail identifying that person as someone with authority? That's the assurance that I have.
In my 5 years at Cherokee Nation, this is the first occurrence that I have seen.
Very good. Thank you, Mr.
And can I just add to that, Councilman? As we look a lot at these questions of authority or not, the terms of the Fayetteville contract are not unreasonable ones, and were we to reopen the landfill, we would certainly want to continue operation on that. That revenue would be important to the viability of that strategy.
And I'm not suggesting that we take the position that the contract is unenforceable. I just want to be clear. But let me be equally clear that we wouldn't be having this discussion but for the absence of evidence that the individual entering into the contract had the authority. My concern really has less to do with this transaction, which may be worthy enough to keep the relationship between Fayetteville and Cherokee Nation. That may well be the best business decision, policy decision, but I just want assurances that going forward we don't have to have these conversations in the future. Sometimes they're unavoidable, but to some extent they are, and I'm getting the assurances that this is an anomaly, that this is odd that this occurred, and that reassures me, and I appreciate that. But don't take my questioning to mean to suggest that we ought to necessarily walk away from any obligation that we have, or walk away from a potential benefit of a business deal between the city of Fayetteville, because those are different questions, but I appreciate the point.
Point well taken.
Mr. Hembry, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I get, and this might be appropriate for Ms. Hale, as we stand today, is ICI making any efforts to get a master plan approved by the EPC?
Today?
As we sit here right now, are they engaged in in trying to get that passed?
I'd have to check to see what my last correspondence with ICI, before Doug was not with ICI, so to speak.
They have
was
pending
that-
proposals before the EPC, however, correct?
I'm sorry?
They do have pending issues before the EPC?
Well, they do. They do have a request for permit modification and some things like that that are pending, and I have had correspondence from their consultants in terms of the actual master plan itself. The only one I think that pertains to that is some correspondence we've had about the discharge permit, stormwater studies that were being done by Pedro and Associates. So.
And it might be beneficial if we cannot.
sorry.
Well, and you've been the point person with the EPC and helping get the negotiations in the master plan. I'll just ask you, do you believe that you're going to have future negotiations with ICI on getting the master plan approved?
No.
Okay. And do you know if ICI is making any efforts to correct the violations that the Cherokee Nation Environmental Protection Commission has forwarded to them?
It doesn't appear that they're making any effort.
I guess the next question for Mr. Carson. Is it known who at the Cherokee Nation negotiated the contract, the terms of the contract with the city of Fayetteville?
No. I have no evidence of any. I have no idea at all.
Because there was a significant price reduction from who city of Fayetteville was using, Waste Management Inc. and the ICI contract, the Cherokee Nation contract. So I would just ask where was the expertise on who negotiated that? If you can find that out, that'd be.
I would speculate, at the risk of some here, that ICI was heavily involved in the negotiation of those terms.
Do we know what, if any, experience that Gary Pitchland had with trash services prior to the formation of ICI?
I don't know.
Obviously, if we're going to continue with the operation of the landfill, a new cell is going to need to be built. There's no space, correct?
Correct.
How much is it estimated to build a new cell, and how long should it take to build?
And both of those are contingent on what kind of cell we build. If we want to do something in the very short term, one of the solutions I posed to deal with some issues, maybe just simply the Fayetteville contract to perform all of that without ramping back up to the 1,200 tons a day. That's a different issue than if we want to go full bore. Whether we want to develop a cell that will last 2 years, 10 years, or 20 years is another issue. I would say if you're looking at those kind of numbers, again, I'm just giving ballparks here. We're talking, a couple of million for the easiest of those options, and probably, 2, 3, 4 times that for the 4 or 5 year plan, or the lifetime plan.
And would this be part of the C&B business plan, or where would you foresee the money being requested to do that?
We take direction from the council and from the chief on those kind of things.
I yield. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Fishenhoff, you have the floor.
Yeah, I guess I would not have so much problem maybe at this moment with the Fayetteville landfill, honoring the Fayetteville contract by the landfill, other than I'm also looking at a copy that I run off the computer of the Northwest Arkansas News, where Gary Dennis, who's the Director of Operations at Fayetteville, are saying they required the company a surety bond of $100,000. And if the company fails to deliver the trash, the city can take over all their equipment and staff, and I think the assets of Federal Hall. He once again says this surety would give the company enough time to hire a new trash hauling company. So I don't see, if Fayetteville doesn't have a problem with taking the assets of Feather Hauling and taking the $100,000 to pay while they find another hauling company, why we have such a problem with it. Because I figure if we open this landfill, and once again it's speculation in the business world, and when it comes up and we open the landfill again, Fayetteville may be a little aggravated us. Then again, they may not, because they're saying right here they have enough time with this surety bond and assets of Feather Hauling to hire somebody to haul the trash But I dare say if we bid it again and we're $1 cheaper than somebody else, my guess is Fayetteville's going to do business with us. Am I correct in assuming that?
Just a couple of observations, really. One is, to abrogate a contract is a very serious matter. We're entering into hundreds of contracts, if not thousands of contracts, during the course of our businesses. And the notion that we break them is, not a light step to take. As a second matter, yes, they have surety, and they would take that $100,000, but they would still sue us, or could sue us, for the difference in what, over the next 5 years, the term of that contract, really 4 years now, but the cost of taking that trash, presumably to Taneytown, which is the other option, and what they're paying us. And so that's $5 a ton. So, they have contractual rights here. And I guess the only final point being, if we reopen the landfill, if that's the decision of the Cherokee Nation, that Fayetteville contract is a good business for us. It's not about doing them favors. It's about money for the Cherokee people. And, we would want to keep that contract for our benefit. So it's the right thing to do from the long-term perspective of our business relationship. It's the right thing to do from the immediate question of what our contractual liabilities might be to Fayetteville. And it's the right thing to do for the bottom line of the landfill.
Okay, so in a nutshell, we're not going to let them take the $100,000 that ICI put up, or their assets, or let them go after them first. Is there no way that we can say Fayetteville, take their $100,000, take their assets, and then we'll come in and pick up the balance?
Perhaps we can talk about that privately, about what some of the options might be on that.
Councilman Roy, you got the floor.
When I looked over the answer to the questions, Mr. Carson, isn't it true we didn't, set aside who signed the contract, we did not waive our sovereign immunity?
That's true.
With that contract. So if you don't waive your sovereign immunity, how can they sue us?
There's a limit to waiver.
That's on the other.
It's my understanding, we did not waive sovereign.
There's no need for
The ICI contract.
Fayetteville does not have a waiver of sovereign immunity.
So if they don't have a waiver, then how can they sue us?
They couldn't. Well, they could sue us, but that would be an affirmative defense, presumably.
Okay. Now, okay. All right. So we're back to the question then, do we have this moral duty to keep going on a contract that we didn't sign? Or we didn't have it signed by someone possibly that had the authority to sign? And to that end, you're doing a real good job, Mr. Carson. But I see in the back of this room Doug Bain. I have a copy of the Fayetteville contract, and the only name I see under Cherokee Nation is Doug Bain. I would like Doug Bain to come forward and tell us under what authority did he sign that contract.
Point of order. At this time, would it be appropriate to go into executive session?
To discuss personnel, we don't talk about that.
No, there's nothing on the agenda that says, that the retention or anything about the employment of Doug Bain's on the agenda. Okay, so therefore it wouldn't be proper to go into executive session. Now,
Could this impact?
This could impact the litigation, and like I want to give the same caveat that I gave earlier, is that we're dancing very dangerously, about setting a course of through a public record, setting a course for litigation strategy that I would hope that we would keep available to all of us, because that's, I would refrain at this point on the basis of caution. Mr. Bain obviously is free to answer any question that he so wished, but we do have the Attorney General here. I don't know if she would join with my assessment right there about that or not, but I don't want to.
Answer. Maybe that's a better question to ask. How do we get the answer to that question?
Well, you sent a list of questions to the administration, and they responded in writing.
Well, they didn't really answer that.
I believe that they did about the authority, and that's a confidential memo, and I would not want to put that into the record. But, you sent a written question, you got a written answer, and at this point, I would just leave it at that.
And I would say that answer is a fair statement of the facts. Ms. Gore Jordan, have I left a question on the table?
Yeah, I don't see a lawsuit here.
I guess-
We haven't waived or sovereign immunity, so at best, if there is a lawsuit, we have an absolutely great defense. So, if there's not a lawsuit here, why can't he answer the question?
Well, that might come into play with future litigation against ICI.
No, I'm trying to, point of information, I guess. Considering the warnings given to us by multiple attorneys at this point, including our own Attorney General, I think we've exhausted questions at this point. There's nothing else on the agenda.
No,
I'm concerned the direction the meeting's going, so I'm looking for some Robert's Rules of Order advice or something, because we are open to litigation. There's a lot of stuff.
And perhaps if I could offer to talk privately with people at their leisure today, as with the Attorney General, maybe we can address those issues in that forum.
Yes, let's let Mr. Henry advise us on what to do here.
Mr. Chairman, what I would recommend at this point is questions, as Ms., or Councilperson Jordan had asked, be asked to the Attorney General in private. No, not all the questions. Just have one question.
Is this a proper question then to ask for executive session on this issue?
No.
We're very limited in the amount of executive session that we can go into. That's what the Constitution, has provided, and it is frustrating because we can't really discuss litigation strategy in an open forum. We've done it before. We've ran into this problem before, and we're hitting it right now as we speak. I would hesitate in shutting off this meeting right now because I do believe that there are pertinent questions that still are out there, but one that is going to be paramount as to which way we're going to go in litigation. I wouldn't recommend that we answer that in a public forum.
I will forego the answer to that question if, in that private conversation, Doug Bain is going to answer that question. Not Brad, respectfully, not Mr. Carson, not Ms. Hammonds. I want to know the answer from Doug Bain.
I can't answer for you. I see no. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I will talk to Mr. Bain about that.
I just did.
Okay.
He said he'd happily do that.
Oh, you happily do that. Okay, very good. Well, there we have it. Mr. Bain will happily talk to you.
Then I will defer
Okay.
further that line of questioning.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, just on point of information, in light of that, would it be prudent to, Ms. Gloria is definitely Ms. Jordan is definitely going to be involved in that conversation, perhaps several members. Ms. Fishing Hawk, I know, has a definite interest in light of the questions he's answered. Perhaps we should arrange this meeting now so we don't miss this opportunity.
Would you like to have the meeting now?
Well, I'd like to ask for a short recess, and as far as I'm concerned, as long as it's less than a majority, I want the question answered.
I hear a motion for a short recess.
Is there a second?
I have a question.
Are you talking privately?
Yes.
We can't have a quorum.
Right. No.
Yes, that's what I said, as long as it's less than a majority.
She just wants a 5-minute break.
Yeah.
I have a motion, I have a second. 5-minute break.
Where would you like to do the meeting? Is there a room?
I don't know that.
No on the recess.
We just.
All opposed? No.
2 no?
Would